Welcome to Prayer Solves. Here, you'll find 1-hour collections of modern parables and uplifting tales designed to bring peace, hope, and inspiration to your day. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our weekly stories. And if today's stories touch your heart, please leave a like and share this video with someone who might need encouragement right now. Now, let's begin our journey together through stories of forgiveness, second chances, and quiet miracles. Marcus stared at his computer screen, his finger hovering over the send button, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. The email he'd written and rewritten 17 times sat there, waiting. 3 simple paragraphs that could either heal a 20-year wound or tear it open forever. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. "Dear Dad, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Can we talk?" It seemed impossible that 2 decades of silence could be broken by such simple words. Yet here he was, a successful architect with trembling hands, reduced to the frightened boy who'd stormed out of his childhood home all those years ago. The fight had been about everything and nothing. College choices, life paths, expectations, and pride, so much pride. Marcus had wanted to study art, to create beauty in the world. His father had wanted him to take over the family construction business. Neither had been willing to bend, and in their stubbornness, they'd broken something precious. Marcus pressed send before he could change his mind again. Hours passed, then days. The silence from his father's inbox felt louder than any argument they'd ever had. Marcus checked his email obsessively, during meetings, at lunch, in the middle of the night when sleep eluded him. Each time the inbox remained empty, the rejection cut deeper. A week went by, then 2. Marcus began to wonder if his father had even seen the message. Maybe he'd blocked Marcus's email address years ago. Maybe he'd deleted it without reading. Maybe he simply didn't care anymore. The 3rd week brought a work crisis that consumed Marcus entirely. A major project in downtown Dallas was falling behind schedule, and the client was threatening to pull out. Marcus found himself working 18-hour days, sleeping in his office, surviving on coffee and determination. It was during one of these marathon work sessions that his assistant, Janet, knocked on his door at midnight. "Marcus, honey, you need to go home," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "This project will still be here tomorrow." "I can't, Janet. If I don't figure out this structural issue tonight, we'll lose everything." Janet sat down across from his desk. At 62, she'd been with the firm longer than anyone, and she had a way of cutting through Marcus's defenses like a mother seeing through her child's excuses. "When's the last time you called your family?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "I don't really have..." "Everyone has family, Marcus, even if they're not speaking to you." That night, Marcus finally went home to his empty apartment. He heated up leftover Chinese food and sat on his couch, staring at his phone. On impulse, he called information and asked for his father's number in their small hometown of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. His heart pounded as the phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. "Hello." The voice was older, raspier than he remembered, but unmistakably his father's. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came. 20 years of silence had built a wall so high that he couldn't find a way over it. "Hello," his father said again. "Is someone there?" Marcus hung up, his hands shaking. The next morning brought devastating news. Janet met him at the office door, her face pale. "Marcus, there's been an accident. The construction crew in Dallas." The words hit him like a physical blow. A crane had malfunctioned at their job site. 2 workers were in the hospital, one in critical condition. The project that had consumed his every waking moment suddenly seemed meaningless compared to the human cost. Marcus drove to Dallas immediately, spending the day at the hospital with the families of the injured workers. The man in critical condition was named Robert Chen, and he had a daughter about Marcus's age who held vigil by his bedside. "We had a fight last month," she whispered to Marcus during one of the doctor's visits. About something so stupid I can't even remember what it was about. I kept meaning to call him and apologize, but work got busy and life got in the way. And now, she broke down crying. Marcus sat with her in the sterile hospital corridor, feeling the weight of his own unresolved relationship pressing down on him like a physical force. He thought about his father, probably sitting alone in the house where Marcus had grown up, maybe wondering why his son had called and then said nothing. That evening, Marcus drove back to his hotel room and opened his laptop. His email inbox showed dozens of messages about the accident, insurance claims, and project delays. But there, at the very bottom, was an email he'd almost missed. The sender's address made his heart stop. It was from his father. With trembling fingers, Marcus clicked it open. The email was dated 3 weeks ago, the same day he'd sent his own message. "Son, I've been trying to find your email address for months. I know I was stubborn and proud 20 years ago. I know I said things I can't take back, but not a day goes by that I don't think about you. I've followed your career online. I'm so proud of the man you've become. I was wrong to try to force you into my dreams instead of supporting yours. If you can find it in your heart to forgive an old fool, I'd like to try again. Your mother, you probably don't know, but I remarried 5 years ago to a wonderful woman named Helen. Keeps telling me it's never too late for family. I hope she's right. Love, Dad. P.S. My email is acting up lately. Sometimes messages take weeks to come through. Helen says I need a new computer, but you know how I am with technology." Marcus read the email 3 times before the words fully sank in. His father had been trying to reach him too. The timing, the crossed messages, the weeks of waiting. It had all been a technological mix-up, not rejection. He immediately called the number he'd hung up on the night before. "Dad," he said, when the familiar voice answered. "It's Marcus. I got your email." The silence that followed was different from the silence of the past 20 years. This silence was full of possibility, heavy with emotion too big for words. "Son," his father said finally, and Marcus could hear the tears in his voice. "I was hoping you'd call." They talked for 3 hours that night, about the fight, about the years between, about forgiveness and pride and second chances. Marcus's father had kept every newspaper clipping about Marcus's architectural achievements. Marcus learned that his father had taken art classes after he retired, trying to understand the creative passion he'd once dismissed. A month later, Marcus flew to Iowa to meet Helen and have dinner at the house where he'd grown up. His father had converted the old garage into an art studio, and his amateur paintings covered every wall, landscapes mostly, but also one canvas that took Marcus's breath away. It was a painting of Marcus's first building, the one that had launched his career. His father had painted it from a photograph he'd found online, capturing not just the structure, but somehow the dream behind it. "I wanted to understand," his father said simply, "and I wanted to see what you saw." As they stood in that converted garage, surrounded by evidence of a love that had never really disappeared, Marcus understood something profound about timing and grace. His unanswered email hadn't been unanswered at all. It had been part of a bigger conversation that God had been orchestrating all along. Sometimes, what feels like silence is actually preparation. Sometimes, what looks like rejection is just bad timing. And sometimes, the very delays that frustrate us are exactly what we need to be ready for the blessings that await. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." Isaiah 55:8. The empty chair at the head of the table mocked everything Sarah had tried to build. Thanksgiving dinner was in 2 hours, and that chair, her brother David's chair, sat there like an accusation, reminding everyone of the family fracture that had defined their holidays for 3 years. Sarah adjusted the place setting for the 5th time, her hand shaking as she folded the napkin. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was setting a place for someone she'd sworn never to speak to again. The fight had been spectacular, the kind that leaves scorch marks on a family's history, David had borrowed money from their father's medical fund, money meant for their dad's cancer treatment, to invest in some cryptocurrency scheme that had collapsed within weeks. $30,000 gone. Their father had died 6 months later, not because of the missing money, but Sarah couldn't separate the two events in her mind. "You might as well take that chair away," her husband Mark said, carrying the turkey from the kitchen. "He's not coming." "I invited him," Sarah replied, her voice tight with stubborn hope and old pain. 3 years too late. Mark wasn't wrong. For 3 years, their family gatherings had been smaller, quieter, marked by David's absence like a missing tooth that your tongue can't stop finding. Sarah's mother had begged her to reach out, especially after their father's funeral. But Sarah's anger had been too hot, too righteous. The text message had come a week ago. "David, it's Sarah. Thanksgiving at our house. 4 p.m. Dad's chair will be there if you want it." She hadn't heard back. The guests began arriving at 3:30. Sarah's mother, Eleanor, came first, her face lighting up when she saw the empty chair. "You invited him," she said, tears immediately springing to her eyes. "I invited him," Sarah confirmed, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "I don't know if he'll come." Her sister Amy arrived next with her teenage twins, followed by Mark's parents and Sarah's aunt and uncle. The house filled with the warm chaos of family, but everyone noticed the empty chair. It was like a storm cloud hovering over their celebration. At exactly 4 o'clock, Sarah called everyone to dinner. They gathered around the extended dining room table, 11 people and 1 empty chair. Sarah had put David's chair at the head of the table, their father's old spot, partly as an olive branch and partly because it felt right. Should we wait?" her mother asked hopefully, glancing toward the window. Sarah looked at the chair, then at the faces around her table. 3 years of holidays without her brother. 3 years of artificial happiness that fooled no one. 3 years of a family pretending to be whole when they all knew a piece was missing. "Let's say grace," Sarah said finally. They joined hands, leaving David's chair surrounded by empty space. Sarah's nephew, Amy's 16-year-old son Jason, was sitting to the left of the empty chair. He reached out his hand toward where David would have been, letting it hover in the air for a moment before pulling it back. Mark began the prayer. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for family, for..." The doorbell rang. Sarah's heart jumped, but she forced herself to stay seated. "Keep going, honey." "For the blessings of..." The doorbell rang again, longer this time, more insistent. Sarah's mother squeezed her hand so tightly it almost hurt. "Sarah." "I'll get it," Jason said, dropping his grandmother's hand and jumping up before Sarah could stop him. They could hear voices at the front door, Jason's enthusiastic teenage chatter and another voice, deeper, hesitant. Sarah's heart began to race. She knew that voice. Even after 3 years of silence, she knew it. Jason appeared in the dining room doorway, grinning like he'd just delivered the best present ever. "Look who I found," he announced. David stepped into view behind him. Sarah's brother looked older, thinner than she remembered. His hair had more grey, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. He wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans, and he carried a small wrapped box in his hands. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said quietly, his eyes finding Sarah's across the room. "I wasn't sure I should come." The silence stretched like a held breath. Sarah stared at her brother, this man she'd grown up with, fought with, loved, and lost. All the anger she'd carried for 3 years sat in her chest like a stone. But seeing him standing there, nervous and hopeful, she felt something shifting. "Your chair's waiting," she said finally. David's eyes went to the head of the table, to their father's chair that Sarah had kept for him. His face crumpled slightly, and Sarah saw the boy he'd been, the brother who used to build forts with her in their backyard and share secrets under flashlight tents. He walked around the table slowly, as if approaching something sacred. When he reached the chair, He paused, looking down at it. "I don't deserve Dad's chair," he said. "And none of us deserve Dad's chair," Sarah replied, standing up. "But he's not here to sit in it, and you're his son. You belong here." David looked up at her, and she saw 3 years of guilt and regret swimming in his eyes. "Sarah, Sit down," she interrupted gently. "We'll talk after dinner. Right now, let's just be family." David sat down carefully, as if the chair might disappear beneath him. Jason immediately took his seat to David's left, chattering about school and football as if his uncle had never been gone. The natural way her son accepted David's presence broke something loose in Sarah's chest. They joined hands again for grace, and this time, the circle was complete. David's hands were warm and slightly rough. He'd been doing manual labor, Sarah realized. His grip on her mother's hand was gentle, reverent. Mark continued the prayer where he'd left off, but his voice was thicker now, for the blessings of forgiveness, for second chances, and for the love that binds families together, even when we think it's broken. "Amen. Amen," they chorused. Dinner passed in a blur of conversation, laughter, and careful navigation around the years of silence. David was quieter than he used to be, more thoughtful. He asked about everyone's lives, genuinely listening to the answers. Sarah found herself watching him, looking for the irresponsible brother she'd been angry with, but seeing instead a man who had clearly been shaped by loss and regret. During dessert, David cleared his throat and pulled out the small wrapped box he'd brought. "I have something," he said, his voice uncertain. "It's not much, but..." He slid the box across the table to Sarah. Inside was a simple silver locket, tarnished with age. Sarah recognized it immediately. It had belonged to their grandmother, their father's mother. She opened it with trembling fingers and found 2 tiny photos inside. One of their father as a young man, and one of David and Sarah as children, arms around each other. Gap-toothed grins beaming at the camera. "Dad gave it to me before he died," David said quietly. "He said to give it to you when the time was right. I've been carrying it for 3 years, waiting for the courage." Sarah looked up at her brother, tears streaming down her face. "David, I know I can't undo what I did," he continued. "I know I can't bring back that money or those last months with Dad. I've been working construction, trying to save up to pay back what I took, but it's slow going. I don't expect forgiveness. I wanted you to know, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sarah." The anger Sarah had carried for 3 years cracked open like an egg, and something warm and healing poured out. She looked around the table at her family, her mother crying quietly, Mark nodding encouragingly, her children watching with wide eyes as they witnessed grace in action. "You don't need to pay back the money," Sarah said. "Dad wouldn't want that. He'd want his family together." "But the money's gone, David. Dad's gone. But we're still here. We can still choose love over anger, forgiveness over bitterness." She stood up and walked around to David's chair. Her brother looked up at her with tear-filled eyes, waiting for judgment or mercy. Sarah hugged him. It was awkward at first, with David sitting and Sarah standing. But then he stood too, and they held each other the way they had as children after nightmares, fierce and protective and healing. "I missed you," Sarah whispered. "I missed you too," David replied. "Every single day." The rest of the family joined them, and soon it was a group hug around David's chair, their father's chair, as if they were physically pulling him back into the family circle where he belonged. Later, after the dishes were washed and the leftovers distributed, Sarah found David alone in the living room, staring at a photo on the mantle of their father. "He would have loved this," David said, "or seeing us together again." "He would have," Sarah agreed, "but I think he knew it would happen. That's why he saved the locket for you to give to me. He knew love would win eventually." David turned to her, his face serious. "I want to do better, Sarah. I want to be the brother Dad raised me to be, the uncle your kids deserve. Then come back next year. Sarah said simply. And the year after that, family isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. That empty chair had taught them all something profound about grace. Sometimes the most powerful presence is an absence that makes us realize what we're missing. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give is the space for someone to return home. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. Ephesians 4:32. Maya's whole life fell apart at exactly 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October. She watched her bus, the 742 to downtown, pull away from the curb as she ran down the street, her heels clicking desperately against wet pavement, her presentation materials scattered in her arms like fallen leaves. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. She was supposed to be at Hartwell & Associates in 17 minutes to deliver the pitch that would either launch her marketing consultancy into the stratosphere or bury it forever. Maya stood at the empty bus stop, rain beginning to fall, and felt the weight of 6 months of preparation crashing down around her. She'd quit her corporate job to start her own business. She'd maxed out her credit cards, borrowed money from her parents, and sacrificed every weekend for half a year to prepare for this single presentation. Her phone showed 7:44 a.m. The next bus wasn't scheduled until 8:15, which would put her downtown at 8:45, 15 minutes late for the most important meeting of her life. No, she muttered, frantically opening her rideshare app. The screen showed a 20-minute wait for the nearest driver and surge pricing that would cost more than she had left in her checking account. Maya called the office, her hands shaking as she dialed. A receptionist answered on the third ring. Hartwell & Associates, how may I help you? This is Maya Chen. I have an 8 a.m. meeting with Mr. Hartwell about the Morrison account. I'm going to be about 15 minutes late due to transportation issues. Is there any way... I'm sorry, Ms. Chen. Mr. Hartwell has a very tight schedule today. If you're not here by 8, he'll have to move on to his next appointment. This was made very clear when the meeting was scheduled. The line went dead. Maya stared at her phone, feeling her dreams slip away like water through her fingers. 6 months of work, gone because she'd overslept by 3 minutes and missed a bus by 30 seconds. She sank onto the bus stop bench, not caring that it was wet from the rain. This was supposed to be her year. She'd been so careful, so prepared. She'd practiced the presentation dozens of times, researched Hartwell's company inside and out, and even bought a new outfit she couldn't afford because she wanted to look the part of a successful consultant. The rain began falling harder, and Maya realized she didn't even have an umbrella. She'd been so focused on getting out the door on time that she'd forgotten the weather report. Now she was going to sit here for 30 minutes and get soaked while watching her business fail before it ever really started. A car pulled up to the curb in front of her. Maya looked up, hoping against hope that it might be her rideshare arriving early, but it was just an older sedan with a kind-faced woman behind the wheel. The woman rolled down her window. "Honey, are you okay? You look like you're having the worst day of your life." Maya almost laughed at how accurate that assessment was. "I missed my bus. I had the most important meeting of my life at 8 a.m. and now..." She gestured helplessly at the empty street. "Where do you need to go?" "Downtown, the Hartwell building. But it doesn't matter now. The meeting's off." The woman pulled into a parking spot and turned off her engine. She was probably in her 60s, with silver hair and warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm Ruth," she said, getting out of her car. "And you are definitely not having the worst day of your life, even though it feels like it right now." "How can you possibly know that?" Maya asked, tears mixing with raindrops on her face. Ruth sat down beside her on the wet bench, apparently unconcerned about her clothes getting soaked. "Because 30 years ago, I missed the most important job interview of my life. I was supposed to interview for a position at a prestigious law firm. Perfect job, perfect salary, perfect life all mapped out. But my car broke down. I couldn't afford a cab, and I missed it completely. What happened? I thought my life was over. I went home, cried for about 6 hours, and then decided I had to do something, anything, to keep moving forward. So I took a temporary job at a small non-profit organization just to pay the bills while I figured out my next move. Ruth smiled, her eyes distant with memory. That temporary job turned into a career. I met my husband there. He was volunteering in the legal aid clinic. We built something beautiful together, helping families navigate the legal system when they couldn't afford big firm lawyers. I never got the prestigious job or the big salary, but I got something better. I got purpose. Maya wiped her nose with a soggy tissue. That's a nice story, but I don't see how it helps me. I've put everything into this business. If it fails, you'll figure out what comes next. That's what people do. But maybe it's not failing. Maybe it's just changing direction. As if summoned by Ruth's words, Maya's phone rang. She glanced at it, expecting to see her mother's name. Her mum always called when Maya was having a crisis, as if she had some kind of maternal radar. Instead, it was a number she didn't recognize. Maya Chen. The voice was professional, crisp. Yes? This is Jennifer Morrison from Morrison Industries. I understand you were supposed to meet with Hartwell and Associates this morning about our account. Maya's heart sank further. Yes, I was. I'm so sorry, but I had a transportation emergency, and, actually, that's why I'm calling. Hartwell just called me to say you were a no-show, and frankly, I'm grateful. We've been having second thoughts about working with them. Their approach seemed too aggressive, too disconnected from our company values. But your initial proposal, the one you submitted to get the meeting, really resonated with us. Maya blinked, trying to process what she was hearing. What? Would you be interested in meeting with us directly? We're looking for a marketing consultant who understands family-owned businesses, someone who gets that we care more about community impact than just profit margins. Your proposal showed exactly that kind of thinking. Ruth was watching Maya's face, smiling as if she knew exactly what was happening. Yes, absolutely. When would be convenient? How about this afternoon? Say, 2 p.m. at our offices. We're in the Morrison building downtown, about 6 blocks from Hartwell. And Maya, don't worry about being perfect. We're more interested in authentic than polished. After Maya hung up, she sat in stunned silence for a moment. Ruth patted her shoulder gently. God has a funny way of closing doors to open windows, Ruth said. Sometimes what looks like the worst possible timing is actually perfect timing. I don't understand how this happened. Hartwell probably called Morrison to complain about your no-show, expecting them to side with him. Instead, it gave Morrison the excuse they needed to reconsider their choice. Sometimes, our failures are exactly what other people need to see our true character. The 8:15 bus arrived, and Maya realized she no longer needed it. The meeting that had seemed so crucial an hour ago now felt like a near miss, a bullet dodged rather than an opportunity lost. Can I give you a ride somewhere? Maya asked Ruth. It's the least I can do. Actually, Ruth said with a mysterious smile, I was on my way to the Morrison building myself. I'm Jennifer Morrison's mother-in-law. I volunteer there twice a week, helping with their community outreach programs. Maya stared at her. Are you serious? Completely. Jennifer mentioned they were meeting with marketing consultants today, and when I saw you sitting here looking like your world was ending, I had a feeling. Sometimes angels don't have wings. Sometimes they just have good timing and a willingness to sit in the rain with a stranger. The afternoon meeting went better than Maya had dared to hope. Morrison Industries was everything Hartwell and Associates wasn't. Warm, community-focused, and genuinely interested in marketing that made a positive impact. They offered her a 6-month contract on the spot, with the possibility of extension if things went well. As Maya walked back to her car after the meeting, she thought about the morning's disaster that had turned into an unexpected blessing. She'd been so focused on forcing one door open that she'd almost missed the window God was opening right beside it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ruth. How did it go, dear? Maya typed back. Perfect. Thank you for reminding me that God's timing is better than mine." "Always is," came the reply, "even when we can't see it yet." 6 months later, Maya's business was thriving. Morrison Industries had not only extended her contract, but had recommended her to 3 other family-owned businesses. She'd learned something invaluable that rainy Tuesday morning. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is actually the best thing in disguise. She still took the 7:42 bus when she could, and sometimes she saw other people running late, looking desperate and defeated. When she did, she remembered Ruth's kindness and tried to pass it forward, because sometimes missing the bus you think you need is exactly how you catch the ride you were meant to take all along. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Romans 8:28. The antique pocket watch stopped ticking at exactly 3:17 p.m. on the day Daniel lost his job, and he couldn't help but see it as some kind of cosmic joke. Time had stopped for him in more ways than one. His career, his future plans, his carefully constructed timeline for success, all frozen like the delicate hands of his grandfather's timepiece. Daniel had carried that watch every day for 15 years, ever since his grandfather's funeral. It had belonged to 4 generations of men in his family, each one a symbol of punctuality, reliability, and the steady march of progress. Now it sat silent in his palm, as useless as Daniel felt himself to be. The job interview had gone worse than badly. He'd arrived precisely on time. The Sullivan family motto was, 5 minutes early is on time is late. But nothing else had gone according to schedule. The interviewer had been distracted, the questions off-putting, and Daniel's carefully rehearsed answers had fallen flat. "We're looking for someone with more flexibility," the hiring manager had said. "Someone who can adapt to changing circumstances, think on their feet. Your background suggests you're very structured, set in your ways." Set in his ways. At 38, Daniel had been dismissed as inflexible, too rigid for a modern workplace that valued creativity over consistency. The words stung because he recognized the kernel of truth in them. He had always lived by schedules, deadlines, and carefully laid plans. Spontaneity was not in his vocabulary. Now he sat on a park bench, holding his broken watch and wondering if maybe he was broken too. The unemployment office had been a nightmare of endless forms and condescending questions. His savings account had enough money for maybe 3 months of mortgage payments. His wife, Lisa, was being supportive, but he could see the worry in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. A jogger ran past, checking her fitness tracker. A businessman hurried by, phone pressed to his ear as he barked about missed deadlines. Everyone else seemed to know exactly where they were supposed to be and when they were supposed to be there. Everyone except Daniel. He looked down at the watch again. Maybe it was time to let go of this old thing, this relic from a different era when things moved more slowly and careers lasted decades instead of years. Maybe it was time to get a modern digital watch, something that could connect to his phone and remind him of appointments he no longer had. "That's a beautiful watch." Daniel looked up to see an elderly man standing nearby, leaning on a walking cane. He was dressed in worn but clean clothes, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "It was," Daniel said. "Now it's just broken." "Mind if I take a look?" the man asked. "I used to repair these old timepieces, hobby of mine." Daniel hesitated, then handed over the watch. The old man examined it carefully, turning it over in his weathered hands. "This is exquisite craftsmanship," he said. "Look at these engravings, the weight of the gold case. They don't make them like this anymore. My grandfather carried it for 40 years. My great-grandfather before him. I've had it for 15 years, and now it's dead." The old man smiled. "Not dead, son, just tired. These old mechanical watches, they need patience. Sometimes they stop not because they're broken, but because they need attention, care, time to be properly maintained." He pointed to a small lever on the side of the watch. "See this? It's not wound properly. When did you last wind it?" Daniel felt heat creep up his neck. I thought it was automatic, self-winding. Some are, but not this beauty. This one needs to be wound every day, with intention, with care. It's not something you can just set and forget. It requires daily attention, a relationship between the keeper and the time. The old man showed Daniel how to gently wind the mechanism, explaining the delicate balance between too little tension and too much. As the spring tightened, Daniel heard something magical, the soft, steady tick of time beginning again. 3:17 became 3:18. There, the old man said, handing the watch back. Good as new. Well, as new as a 100-year-old watch can be. Daniel stared at the moving hands, amazed. I can't believe it was something so simple. Often is, the old man said, settling onto the bench beside him. I'm Walter, by the way, and you look like a man who's having trouble with more than just his timepiece. Something about Walter's gentle manner made Daniel want to talk. He found himself sharing the story of his job loss, his fears about the future, his feeling that time was running out for him to find his place in a world that seemed to value youth and adaptability over experience and reliability. You know, Walter said when Daniel finished, I lost my job when I was about your age. Factory closed down, moved operations overseas. I'd worked there for 18 years, thought I'd retire from there. Instead, I found myself middle-aged, with no skills that seemed to matter anymore. What did you do? Walter smiled. I panicked for a while. Then I got angry. Then I got desperate. I applied for job after job, trying to convince people I could change, that I could learn new tricks. But every interview felt like I was apologizing for being myself. That's exactly how I feel. Then one day, I was helping my neighbor fix his fence, and he mentioned that his elderly father needed someone reliable to help with errands, maintenance, that sort of thing. Not a career, just a way to make some money while I figured things out. Walter paused, watching a mother push her child on a nearby swing set. That temporary job turned into something wonderful. I discovered I had a gift for working with seniors, for understanding what they needed. I started a small business helping elderly people with home maintenance, grocery shopping, companionship. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. Did you make good money? Eventually, yes, but more importantly, I found my purpose. Those seniors didn't care that I wasn't trendy or flexible. They valued exactly what I had to offer: reliability, consistency, respect for tradition. What employers saw as rigidity, my clients saw as dependability. Daniel looked down at his watch, now ticking steadily. So you're saying I should stop trying to be something I'm not? I'm saying maybe the world needs more people like you, not fewer. Maybe instead of trying to fit into someone else's timeline, you need to run on your own. Over the next few weeks, Daniel found himself thinking about Walter's words. He stopped applying for corporate positions that required him to pretend he was someone else. Instead, he started thinking about what he actually enjoyed doing, what came naturally to him. The answer surprised him. He loved organization, planning, helping people create order out of chaos. He'd always been the friend everyone called when they were overwhelmed, the family member who coordinated reunions and managed logistics. Daniel started small. He offered to help his neighbor organize her home office. Word spread, and soon he had 3 clients who needed help with everything from closet organization to estate planning coordination. He wasn't making much money yet, but for the first time in months, he felt useful. The breakthrough came when one of his clients, an elderly professor, mentioned that his adult children were overwhelmed trying to manage his care from out of state. They needed someone local they could trust, someone who could coordinate doctor's appointments, manage medications, and provide regular updates on their father's well-being. You're exactly what we need, the professor said. Someone who understands that good care takes time, patience, attention to detail. Within 6 months, Daniel had built a thriving business as a senior care coordinator. He wasn't getting rich, but he was making a living doing something that mattered, using the very qualities that corporate America had dismissed as outdated. His grandfather's watch became more than just a timepiece. It became a daily reminder of the value of taking time, of doing things properly, of honoring the wisdom of previous generations. Every morning, Daniel wound it carefully, just as Walter had taught him. Every day, it kept perfect time. A year after losing his job, Daniel received a call from his former company. They wanted to hire him back as a consultant to help them develop better systems for managing their aging workforce transition programs. "We realize we may have been too hasty," the hiring manager said. "We need someone who understands the value of experience, who can help bridge the gap between different generations of workers." Daniel looked at his watch, 2:30 p.m., exactly on schedule for his next client appointment. "I appreciate the offer," he said, "but I'm exactly where I need to be right now." That evening, as Daniel wound his grandfather's watch, he thought about time and timing, about the difference between being on schedule and being in sync with God's plan. Sometimes what looks like a setback is actually a setup for something better. Sometimes the thing that breaks is exactly what needs to be fixed for everything else to work properly. His watch hadn't been broken after all. It had just been waiting for the right kind of attention. And maybe Daniel hadn't been broken either. Maybe he'd just been running on the wrong schedule, trying to keep time with a world that was moving too fast to notice what really mattered. Now, he ran on his own time, guided by principles passed down through generations and powered by daily intention. It was a slower pace than the corporate world demanded, but it was steady, reliable, and perfectly suited for the work God had called him to do. Sometimes the most profound truth is the simplest one. Not everything valuable moves fast, and not everything that stops is broken. Sometimes we just need to slow down long enough to wind the spring that keeps our lives ticking forward with purpose and meaning. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Ecclesiastes 3:1. Emma's faith in humanity died on the same day her apartment was robbed, and she was ready to blame God for both losses. She stood in her ransacked living room, staring at the empty space where her grandmother's jewelry box had sat, and felt something fundamental break inside her chest. Something that had nothing to do with stolen possessions and everything to do with stolen hope. The police officer was kind, but realistic. "In a building like this, with no security cameras and dozens of residents, it's unlikely we'll recover your items," he said, closing his notepad. "I'm sorry." Emma nodded numbly. The jewelry wasn't valuable to anyone else. Costume pieces mostly. A few silver rings. A pearl necklace her grandmother had worn to church every Sunday for 30 years. But to Emma, those items had been tangible links to a woman who had taught her that people were fundamentally good, that kindness was always rewarded, and that God watched over those who watched over others. Her grandmother had been wrong about all of it. Emma had moved to the city 6 months ago, full of optimism and armed with her grandmother's wisdom about loving your neighbors and trusting in divine providence. She'd introduced herself to everyone in the building, baked cookies for the elderly man next door, offered to help the single mother upstairs with her groceries. She'd been the kind of neighbor her grandmother had raised her to be. And now someone, possibly one of those same neighbors, had violated her home and stolen the only things that connected her to the woman who had shaped her worldview. The worst part wasn't the theft itself. It was the way it confirmed every cynical thought Emma had been fighting since moving to the city. People weren't good. Kindness wasn't rewarded. And if God was watching over anyone, he apparently wasn't watching over her. Emma's phone buzzed with concerned texts from friends and family, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. What was she supposed to say? That she'd been naive? That her grandmother's faith-filled approach to life was beautiful in theory, but useless in practice? She double-locked her door and closed the curtains, retreating into the kind of protective isolation she'd sworn she'd never embrace. If she couldn't trust her neighbors, she wouldn't interact with them. If the world was cruel, she'd insulate herself from it. For 3 days, Emma left her apartment only for work. She ignored the knocks on her door, let her mail pile up, and pretended not to hear when Mrs. Patterson from upstairs called her name in the hallway. The woman who had baked welcome cookies for strangers was gone, replaced by someone suspicious and withdrawn. On the fourth day, Emma came home from work to find a small package outside her door. Her first instinct was paranoia. What if it was from whoever had robbed her? What if it contained some kind of threat? But the package was wrapped in plain brown paper with her name written in shaky handwriting. Inside, she found her grandmother's pearl necklace and a note written on notebook paper in the same unsteady script. "Dear Emma, I found this in the dumpster behind our building. I think it might be yours. I'm sorry someone hurt you. Your neighbor in 2B. Emma's hands trembled as she held the necklace. It was definitely her grandmother's. She recognized the small chip in one of the pearls, the slightly discolored clasp that had never worked quite right. Someone had found it and returned it. No questions asked, no reward expected. But who was her neighbor in 2B? Emma had lived in the building for 6 months and had never seen anyone go in or out of that apartment. She'd assumed it was vacant. The next morning, Emma knocked on the door of 2B. She knocked softly at first, then louder, but got no response. She pressed her ear to the door and heard the faint sound of television, but no movement. "Hello," she called out. "I wanted to thank you for returning my necklace." Still nothing. Emma tried several more times over the next few days, bringing fresh cookies, flowers from the grocery store, a thank you card. Each time, she left her offerings outside the door of 2B, and each time they were gone the next day, but she never encountered her mysterious neighbor. It was Mrs. Patterson who finally solved the mystery. "You're looking for Harold," the elderly woman said when Emma asked about the resident of 2B. "Sweet man, but very shy. He's been here longer than anyone, must be going on 20 years now. I've never seen him. Few people have. He keeps to himself, only goes out very early in the morning or very late at night. But he's always been quietly helpful. When my husband was sick, Harold used to leave groceries outside our door. Never said a word about it, but I knew it was him." Mrs. Patterson leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I think he has some kind of social anxiety, maybe agoraphobia, but he's got the kindest heart in this building." That evening, Emma sat outside Harold's door and spoke to it as if he were sitting beside her. "Harold, I know you're in there, and I know you can hear me. I wanted to tell you what that necklace means to me. It belonged to my grandmother, the woman who raised me after my parents died. She always told me that people are basically good, that kindness exists everywhere if you look for it." Emma paused, surprised by the emotion in her own voice. "When my apartment was robbed, I stopped believing that. I thought she was wrong about people, about kindness, about God caring for us. But then you found my necklace in the garbage and returned it to me. And I realized maybe she wasn't wrong. Maybe kindness does exist. Maybe it just comes in different forms than I expected." She heard movement on the other side of the door, a chair creaking, footsteps approaching. "You don't have to open the door," Emma said quickly. "I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered. It changed something in me that I thought was permanently broken." The footsteps stopped right on the other side of the door. Emma could sense someone standing there, listening. "My grandmother always said that God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. I think maybe you're one of those people, Harold." For a long moment, there was silence. Then Emma heard the soft sound of someone sitting down on the floor, leaning against the door from the inside. She sat down too, so they were separated by only a few inches of wood. "Would it be okay if I came and talked to you sometimes? Not face to face if you don't want that. Just like this. I think we could be friends." A soft knock came from the other side of the door, just once, but Emma heard it clearly. Over the next few weeks, Emma established a routine. Every evening after work, she'd sit outside Harold's door and talk about her day, her dreams, her struggles with faith and trust in a complicated world. She never expected responses, but sometimes she'd hear small sounds, a chuckle at a funny story, a gentle knock when she shared something sad, the creaking of a chair as Harold settled in to listen. One evening, Emma found a note slipped under her door. Thank you for talking to me. I haven't had a friend in many years. Harold. Emma wrote back, "Thank you for showing me that kindness still exists. You saved more than just my necklace." 3 months after the robbery, Emma's faith hadn't just returned, it had deepened. She'd learned something her grandmother had never explicitly taught her. Sometimes God's love comes through the most unexpected messengers. Sometimes angels are too shy to show their faces, and sometimes the greatest acts of kindness happen in the shadows where no one is looking. The building felt different now, not because the threat of crime had disappeared at her, but because Emma had rediscovered the truth her grandmother had tried to teach her. People were still fundamentally good, even if some of them were also fundamentally broken. Kindness was still rewarded, even if the reward came in forms you didn't expect. And God was still watching over those who watched over others, even if his protectors sometimes hid behind closed doors. Emma never did meet Harold face to face, but their friendship through the door became one of the most meaningful relationships of her life. He continued to leave small gifts, flowers from his window garden, books he thought she'd enjoy, handwritten notes of encouragement when she was having difficult days. And Emma continued to sit outside his door each evening, sharing her life with someone who listened without judgment, who cared without expecting anything in return, who had shown her that the most profound acts of love sometimes happen in the quietest ways. Her grandmother's pearls hung around her neck again, but now they meant something different. They were no longer just a reminder of inherited faith. They were proof that faith could be restored, that trust could be rebuilt one small act of kindness at a time. Sometimes the neighbor who saves your soul is the one you never see. Sometimes the angel who restores your faith is too humble to let you thank them properly. And sometimes the most important conversations happen through closed doors, between hearts that recognize each other even when faces remain hidden. And do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Hebrews 13:2. Thank you for spending this hour with us at Prayer Solves. If these stories brought comfort or inspiration, please support the channel by subscribing and leaving your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Remember, every week we share new uplifting stories to strengthen your heart and your faith. Until next time, may peace and grace fill your days.